Welcome to Break the Bank Garage. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to replace the front struts on this 2017 Ford Escape. Before we get started, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Let's get going. So the first thing we have to do is gain access to the top of the strut mounts that are right in there. So we got to remove this cowl, and we'll start by removing the windshield wipers. This is the driver's side wiper. I can just pull this cap off and then break it loose with a 15mm socket. Now you may have to wiggle it back and forth a little bit, but you can pull the wiper right off. They are different, so it might make it a little easier down the road if you mark one of them. So I'm going to put a piece of blue tape on the driver's side one just so I have an easier time putting them back on and knowing which one's which. I can do the same thing over on the passenger side. Take the cap off and break loose the 15mm nut. As you can see, there are indicators on the windshield to where to line them up when we reinstall, so you don't have to mark anything before taking them off. Now we have a 10mm bolt we have to remove on either side, right at the top of the headlight. Same thing over on the driver's side. Now we have to remove these two T25s that are just holding on the brake reservoir to the cowl. And we can just let that hang there. Now there are 8 of these metal clips that go all the way along the cowl here. And we have to pull those out. This is what they look like. So they're just going over the 2 pieces of plastic and they just need to be pulled off. Now there are a series of push-in type clips that go along the top here. So rather than bend this up and risk breaking them, I'm gonna use a plastic pry tool, put it down in there and just try to pop those out. And the top part of the cowl should just lift right off. Now the top of the shock mount is right under here, so we need to get this bottom part of the cowl off. So on either side, just diagonal down from the wiper motor, there's a 10mm. We have to take those out. That's the driver's side. And there's the passenger side. Now this whole thing will lift out. You'll notice there's some alignment pins there, so you'll have to lift out the front and then pull it forward. Now over here on the passenger side, we can see all 3 of the bolts that hold on the strut assembly. And on the driver's side, we got the same thing, 1, 2, 3. Now we're ready to lift the car up and take off the front wheels. It'll take a 19mm socket to get the lugs off. I'm gonna be demonstrating everything on the driver's side, but the process will be the exact same on the passenger side. So I'm down by the driver's side wheel, I've got it off, and we are trying to get the strut out. And on some vehicles, you can just take off like the sway bar, a few things, and tip this out. But this strut is so buried up there, there isn't really a way to get the knuckle and everything down low enough to get that out. So unfortunately, on this vehicle, we have to pretty much remove everything and get the whole knuckle out. So I'm gonna start by taking the brake caliper off by removing the 2 18mm bolts holding the bracket on. Now we can remove the rotor. Now this 8mm holding the brake hose to the strut has to come out. Now the top of the sway bar link here is a 15mm. I tried to zip it off with the impact, but it just spun. So I've got an Allen key, then I got a 15mm ratcheting wrench, and I'm just gonna hold the center and spin the nut off. And you can remove just the top of the sway bar, and this bracket's gonna come off with it. Now following the wire for this wheel speed sensor right back here, you just press down right there. You can unplug this and move that out of the way. Now the nut for this tie rod can come off. There are some specialty tools to pop these out, but I'm going to soak it with some PB Blaster. Then I'll just hit around the knuckle here to try to break it loose. You want to be careful not to hit the threads. Going to put the nut back on and hit it with a soft dead blow. Maybe a few taps with the steel hammer. There we go. You just want to be careful not to go too hard on it. You don't want to wreck the top of this nut. Now I've got a 32 millimeter axle nut socket to remove the axle nut here. The lower ball joint here has a 15 millimeter, and I just have a crescent wrench holding the nut on the other side. Now we have to separate this lower ball joint from the knuckle here. It's just got this metal clip. This can just be bent out of the way. And of course, I'm going to start with some PB Blaster. Now just to get a little better access, I'm going to take off these 3 10 millimeters holding the backing plate on. And now I've positioned a jack lifting up on the suspension so I can try to knock the lower control arm down so the ball joint pops out. All right, you can see the ball joint is now pulled out of the knuckle there. So I pushed the lower control arm down enough to get that ball joint out. Now I'll remove the bolt holding the knuckle onto the strut. Now with that bolt out, I can take the axle out, just move it off to the side, and the knuckle should slide down off of the strut now. However, it's likely to be pretty stuck, so I'm going to give it a few taps. And there is the knuckle. That thing was really on there well. Now up top, I'm taking out the 3 13 millimeter bolts that are holding the strut on. And as I do the last one, I've got another hand underneath holding the strut so it doesn't fall. Now with the knuckle out, I'm going to put the new shock into the knuckle before installing it into the vehicle. And this is one of the reasons that I removed the dust shield, so we don't bend it or mangle it when this knuckle is sitting on the floor. So I'm going to take a wire brush and clean up the inside of this knuckle as best as I can so that the new shock slides in a little easier. Now before I try to slide the new strut in, I'm going to try to expand this a little bit. There are specialty tools to expand these. I don't have them on hand, so I'm just going to use this screwdriver that doesn't quite fit into there, and I'm going to pound it in to spread this apart a little bit. Now I've opened that up a little bit, and I'm going to generously apply some grease inside the knuckle here. And now I can slide in the new strut. And you'll notice it'll bottom out right on this bracket that's welded on. Now I can remove the screwdriver. And I can put this 15 millimeter bolt back in that holds the knuckle. The new strut came with new bolts, so I need to take those out before lifting it into the car. Now I can lift the whole assembly in. Get the top up there, and kind of all at once, get the axle started. Now I'll go up top and start all 3 of the bolts and tighten them down. Now I'm going to put the axle nut back on. And I'll torque that down to 100 foot-pounds. The wheel speed sensor can be plugged back in. And the tie rod can be put back in. Now the sway bar link can go back through the hole on the strut, and this little bracket will go right over the stud, and the 13mm nut can go on. Now I'll put the bolt back through for this lower ball joint. Now the brake backing plate can go back on, and there are 3 10mm bolts. And the rotor slides on. Now the brake caliper can be slid back over the rotor, and you can install the 2 bolts on the back of the caliper into the bracket. And the last thing down here before we put the wheel on is to reconnect this bracket that holds the brake hose with the 8mm bolt. Then the wheel can go back on. With the wheel back on, just go to the passenger side, do the exact same thing on that side, and then we can lower the car back down and we'll get everything put back together up here in the engine bay. First thing we'll do up top here is put the lower portion of the cowl back into place. Now you can put in the 10mm bolts that hold the lower cowl on here. So there's these 2 and then 2 more on the other side. Now for the top part of the cowl, these clips are what go into the slots right here. So start with that top side first. Now all of these black metal retaining clips can be put back right here. Now the brake fluid reservoir can be put back in place. Now we're ready to put the wiper arms back on, but to get these in the right spot, we need to turn the ignition of the car on. So go ahead and just turn the ignition on without starting up the car, just so all the lights turn on. And with everything on, make sure the wipers are off and they will be in the resting position. So now you can put the wiper arm on. Get the nut just started. And now position the wiper blade right in the middle of this. The upper one is for the driver's side wiper blade, and the lower one is for the passenger side. With it in the right position, hold the blade steady with one hand and then tighten it down with the other. And reinstall the plastic cap. Then do the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to cycle the wipers once just to make sure they align properly. All sounds good and there's no interference. That's it. So now we've got new suspension in the front of this 2017 Ford Escape. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Here's a few more videos I think you might enjoy.